Hey, how you doing? Good to see you today. Wow. I have some really, some of you know this and some of you maybe don't, but I have a real surprise guest today as our co-host, Rick West. Hey, Rick, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Welcome to our book study. I'm so happy to have you. The only thing that is missing for today's book study, since you're our co-host, is we won't have you on the chat board. Oh my God.
That's right.
What are we
That's right.
what are we gonna
Yeah, I
do?
love the chat. The chat's easy. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, I like the chat. It just,
Well, you do it well, and it's helpful. It's been really great to have your comments and your support in for years now
yeah,
in the chat, and this is our first time, I think. Isn't this the first time you've been like on the video with
yeah,
us,
yeah,
with me as a
yeah,
co-host? And
yeah,
yeah, this is a treat for
yeah.
all of
I'm a
us.
little
So
camera shy. Uh,
everyone give a warm high five welcome
yeah,
to Rick West. Love you, man. And I love your hairstyles, also pretty awesome. We don't have much
great. Thank you. One in a kind.
we don't
Yeah.
spend much money on shampoo, do we?
That's funny.
Funny.
It's hilarious.
Uh,
Um,
well, thank you for your support over the years, Rick, and for being able to be part of this book study. This is great.
right, right.
So we're looking at the, of course, the discourses that you know that we're looking at, or I think we're looking at, or is it
331. 331.
331? Okay, 331 to 340,
40.
I guess. Yeah.
What?
And without further ado, let's get started.
Okay. Well, one
330.
thing I'd like to
Okay, go
say,
ahead.
Bill, is what we do here, and these sessions are invaluable, is rather fast. Okay, it's rather repetitive, which is very good. It can even seem contradictory, which is also good. But the fast part doesn't really align with the direct path. And so, what I'm saying, it's important to break these down in your own time and go slow, uh, so you can kind of get beyond the conceptual. Because the direct path ain't about doing anything fast. Uh, and sometimes to get beyond the conceptual, you really need to. You can spend a week on one discourse if need be. And I
Yeah,
think it's important that we all realize that.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. And one of the things I'm sure this happens to many of us, but one of the things that I've noticed for myself when I'm reading the discourses and I'm getting ready for this class, this gathering, I'll read a discourse and I'll go, what the hell does that mean? And
Yeah,
then I'll move on and I'll do another one and I'll then go back to that one. And all of a sudden it's dropped in what it means. It
yeah,
just
nice.
a
Yeah,
clarity sort
yeah,
of drops in. So it's kind of like what you just said. Don't look for the rapid, for the immediate
yeah,
clarity on it.
yeah,
Let
yeah,
let it soak in. It will.
yeah. And repetition is the mother of clarity. It really is. And it's more important to kind of get that, like you said, to get a sense of what's being said. Uh, that's more important than kind of intellectually understanding it, if that makes any sense. Just
Yeah.
kind of get a feel like, so you can say yes to it, so to speak. Uh,
And the
but
yes happens without your help. It
yeah,
just
exactly.
it
In
sort of
spite of
reveals itself.
in spite of yourself.
Yeah.
331
Yeah.
says, what is the test of spiritual sadhana? Now, this is kind of a progressive question with a not so progressive answer, um, which all his answers are not obviously direct to the point, as Atmananda. Um, right up front, I kind of take issue with the word spiritual. I mean, spiritual compared to what? What isn't spiritual? You know, it just implies a sense of specialness. It's rather progressive in nature. It's a distinction we don't need to make.
Hmm.
Yeah, really. Um, But he says, when you are engaged in mental activity, that the true test, or if there's any objectivity at all, the slightest amount of objectivity, it's not spiritual. And I agree with that. Technically, that's very correct. It's about the gaps, you know, it's about the glimpses, no objectivity. You know, there's nothing there. That's hard to argue. But on the other hand, samadhis are a pretty high bar. You know, samadhis aren't very functional. Okay. So it's just a way of looking at it. He said there's no when there's if there's no objectivity at all, meaning no phenomenal qualities, nothing you can say about it, then it's spiritual in nature or atmic
So
in nature.
let's kind of maybe give a different synonym for spiritual, since you mentioned that. There's a word that I heard a lot in the interviews that I just finished in Europe that I haven't heard it a lot until these interviews. It's the word awakeness. There's a lot of there's a lot of, I mean, I kept hearing the word awakeness from the interviewee, and that is a little tighter than spiritual.
I agree. And again, they're just words. What I think works a little bit better than whether it's objective or not, because I would argue any mental activity, if you can be in the flow, washing your dishes, cutting the grass, and there's some mental activity there, right? There's some objectification, but you can still like be in the flow of things. Okay. So I think a more accurate pointer is not so much the objectivity, but if there's a sense of lack, if there's any ignorance. In other words, does the act, is it doing refer to a me? Okay. An individual, somebody that's getting something out of it, or whatever the case may be. If it's an impersonal act, you're in the flow. Okay. Even if it is a bit objective, like going for a walk or mountain climbing, you know, there's some mental activity there, but you can still be in the flow. So I think that's an important distinction. Not to get wrapped around this objectivity thing.
But there's a definition that Jenny Beal just posted on the chat. Direct path definition: everything we think or do is spiritual if it is not done from belief in being separate, being the separate entity.
Nice.
There's nothing wrong with thinking terms of objects as long as we know their reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
See,
nice.
that's a mature, direct experience.
Yeah. Because when you think about it, objectivity is a result of the senses. The senses create objectivity, right? I mean, when they're fueled by thought. Okay. So it's an important, and objectivity means nothing more than objects, you know, table, chair, gross object, or subtle objects, a thought.
Wouldn't it? I was going to say, wouldn't it be thought, or any kind of thought impulse,
any perception, a sensation, a thought can be considered
maybe not a thought impulse,
subtle.
but a thought attachment.
I would say any thought is a subtle object. It's something that can
Thank
be
you,
noticed.
Jenny, for that. Well, let's finish that rest of that discourse.
But okay, when he talks about the test of spiritual sadhana,
what's the definition for sadhana?
Well, sadhana to me means practices. It's normally, in my mind, associated with more progressive type practices. In other words, there's a doing with an end state in mind. But really, anything can be a sadhana. And I would argue that they all have their role, all of them. In fact, Francis gives a great analogy about different practices and teachings. If you consider realization as landing on the runway, all these other paths and practices you did throughout your life, they were just like an airplane given vectors all the way to the runway until you got in line with the runway, the direct path. They got you where you were, where you are today. So they all have their value to some degree, in my mind.
Right.
All practices.
He says, but if there is no such objectification at all, it is purely spiritual or atmic in nature. This is this is one of the tests of spiritual sadhana.
Yeah, he's talking about the gap, like we said, the ultimate, the samadhi. It's a nice way of looking at it, but it's a very high bar. I think a more accurate, better, perhaps way of looking at it is in terms of ignorance. What are you actually identifying with? No attachment. And the sadhana, as far as what is a sadhana, I would say the best of sadhana is, especially post-glimpse, is your everyday life. How you, especially post-glimpse, once you have kind of an understanding, but how you apply that to your life and how that's unraveled in your day-to-day life. That's a practice. Like living in a cave somewhere where there's no crisis, no confusion, no CNN, no Fox News, no problems. A sadhana is everyday life and how you go about and exercise and live that life in accordance with your understanding. Because it's kind of like dealing, in some respects, dealing with an addiction. The first step of any addiction is what? Denial, okay? And it's just not being in denial of what's going on, okay? Our relationship with thought, how we see every experience, it's addressing the addiction in some respects, if that helps anybody. I wrote down a couple notes here.
Carol mentioned, what do you mean by the flow? You mentioned the flow.
What I mean mostly by the flow is there's a doing. I would say there can be objectivity, okay, but you're in the flow. It's not a means to an end. It's not doing something in order to accomplish something else. You're in the flow. You're cutting the grass, not because it's got to be done by 3. You're just into it, man. You're just enjoying it. The me falls away.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a happening. There's
it's just a happening.
It's just a happening that is you're uninvolved.
Yes.
Uninvolved.
It's not a samadhi. There's still objectivity.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's what I'm saying. Ignorance is probably a better mark.
And Jenny said, flow is just flow of experience. There's no person doing anything.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
The doing without the doer. Okay.
Right.
The doing without the doer.
What were you going to say?
I wrote down a couple bullets about random thoughts about any practice. If I can read it here. Really, it's about, I wrote it down, just a couple of quick bullets. It's about stopping the insanity in your life. That's really what it's about. Okay. And your hypnotic addiction to your senses and thought. That's a big part of it. As we talked about many other times, it's always about understanding, period. No, not about any kind of beliefs. And understanding can be, like we said, can be twofold. There's a conceptual kind of understanding when you read something, and that works for a while. It has its role, but there's a deeper understanding that can't even be put in words. It's I get it. Okay. Yeah. And don't let the words fool you. It's something as simple as I know. Okay. We say that all the time, but what does that mean? What is this I that knows? What does it mean to know anything? That kind of thing, getting into the crux of the words, what the words are really pointing to is what's really fundamental.
Yeah. I know egoic also. I mean, very, I know
Oh
that.
yeah, that's my point.
What are you
Exactly.
talking
That's
about?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem. It has to be
Mhm.
rooted in not knowing. Uh, Another bullet, nothing special, which was no expectations. Uh, um, Teachings or samadhi can have a very destructive quality to them in terms of, it can appear that way, in terms of costing you your opinions, okay, some of your beliefs, your values, all that stuff gets up in the air, okay.
Mm.
So that's what I mean by destructive quality. Who you think you are, who you think others are, all that sort of thing, all that gets put on the table. Uh, Another one would be
Well,
grounded in silence.
the test of I don't know. I mean, I like the question. Many of us here, or several of us here, know Amir Freeman. He's been in our conferences as the co-host, or he and Ann Sweet in our conferences. He's in Israel right now, and he was
Oh,
living on the Gaza Strip right there right before the missiles started landing, and that is a time when one really, that to me, that would be the true test of one's identification with the self and the truth nature. And from his description on Facebook, it sounds like he was actually following, listening, and wasn't calling it that when he was moved from his apartment to a shelter. It moved him. Just listening moved him in a timely way right before destruction hit the building that he was in. So
yeah. I mean,
interesting.
it's amazing. Being in the flow, action happens. The right action
There it
comes out
is.
of flow. It
Yeah.
really does. Uh,
Yeah.
we'll quickly throw a story on it and say this is why, and this caused what, but it's really comes out of the flow.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to say sadhana is about standing at his awareness, period. Standing as awareness, not in awareness. There's a distinction, but as awareness.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming um, one with everything. I mean, that's a great experience, but there's a distinction between becoming one in everything and realizing you are everything. And one could sit on that for quite a while. That's a huge distinction, but there are huge differences. But
Yeah.
very often people, I'm one with awareness, or I'm with everything else. You are everything else. Okay, and that's a good thing to contemplate.
Hmm.
Uh, but regardless of the samadhi, I think the magic behind all of them is really what.
The samadhi, you mean?
Yeah, any samadhi. Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry, any sadhana,
Okay.
sadhana is what Nisargadatta called earnestness. That interest, being
Right.
interested, being willing,
Yeah.
open to the invitation. That's the real magic.
Mm.
That curiosity and being open and being able to be honest about your own experience. That's the magic. Because without that, I mean, and that's the same thing that why people are here today. I'm sure there's a lot of places people could be right now, but there's an interest in this for some reason. Okay,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that should not be discounted. That's
Right.
really the gold, so to speak. Um,
Yeah.
and in fact, Adi Shanti, in closing up this one, uh, said that the most important thing is discovering what the most important thing is. And I just always like that. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Not necessarily something you're going to write down, make a list of what's important to you. No, no, no. In fact, if you can't write it down, you're probably getting close. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Uh, you're fun. This is
Uh,
fun. Okay, let's keep going.
332. This, don't even ask me to pronounce this thing. This is the moral of the Bushunda, the story of the mythological cow, okay, deeply rooted into Hindu philosophy. And the story is kind of complicated. I don't know it completely, but fortunately, the moral of the story is a lot easier than the story itself. Okay, because the story is about, this sage or young aspirant. He studied Lord Shiva and Rama, but he felt he was just all about his own opinions about the truth. He loved the truth, but his opinions about the truth. He had a lot of great teachers, but he refused to recognize Lord Rama. So there was a pissing contest between the two. One god put a curse on him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line, he was turned into a crow. Okay, and he maintained this existence as a crow basically forever through each extinction cycle. Okay, through every destruction of the universe. Okay, he keeps coming back as the crow. And they call this distinction or destruction the cosmic deluge. How you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Deluge, which is known as Perlea. And again, that's just another word again for this no objectiveness, no objectivity. It's the same thing. It's the gap. That's why they call it God's deep sleep. There's nothing there. It's total extinction. That's God's deep sleep. That's the gap. Okay. But he didn't see that. He didn't understand that. He came his level of success is coming back as a crow. Immortality, reincarnation means nothing if you don't have the truth. Okay. You can live forever. It's meaningless. There's no peace in it. Okay. And it took him, he had to apply great effort, it says, to maintain his ego. And I translate that as ignorance, his identification with form. Okay. Okay. Identification with form always takes great effort because it doesn't really exist. Okay. Rather than identifying with the gap, with the deluge, he identified with form, the crow.
Wow.
And I think that's the moral of the story.
Yeah. Well, you just really made that super clear. That was really brilliant. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah. And the background that I wasn't aware of makes way more sense of the discourse. Thank you for that.
He didn't learn to die before you die. Okay. He decided to cling on to form. Okay. Or ego, or his sense of identity with body form. Because all form is phenomenal, whether it's a virus, microbe, a galaxy, a planet, they come and go. Okay. There are risings. Okay. But that which doesn't come and go, the deluge or the gap, he refused to identify with. I mean, at least that's how I see it.
Right.
Okay.
And that answers the last sentence. The moral is that he had to strain himself endlessly to maintain his ego, with the result that he was never at peace.
Yeah.
And you could say, I mean, that's a that's a big soundbite for each one that is having the human experience and wanting, maybe frustrated. What is life all about? What am I here for? Why do I keep looping on this treadmill? Yeah.
Yeah. You may become a better crow, okay, but you're still a crow. Okay. There's no peace in form, is what they're saying. It's a very progressive outlook. Okay. It's a very progressive outlook.
Yeah.
Vice and non-progressive is, toward the non-objective, so to speak.
Right.
Okay. Okay. 333.
Well, first, Dan said something in the chat. According to Hindu cosmology, a parleya or cosmic dissolution lasts for one kalpa, which is equal to 4.32 billion years in human time. This is followed by a period of equal length called parleya itself, during which the universe exists in a non-manifested state. This cycle of creation and destruction repeats itself infinitely, with each kalpa being a day in the life of Brahma, the creator god. Brahma is said to live for 100 kalpas, which means that the universe exists for a total of 311.04 trillion years. Oh my God, before being destroyed and recreated. That's fun. That
Yeah.
sounds like you know what you're talking about, Dan. Thank you for that.
Um, Bill, it's pralaya, and
Right.
it's the silent destructive motion of Mahakala, or great time, in the Buddhist tantric tradition. But it's also in Hindu. But the idea of Mahakala is really Shiva's dance, and he takes a break,
Okay.
and that's the break.
That's
Is
cool stuff, man. All that stuff that you thought was a little bit like, all these gods and all these different things were just really symbols for the
Yeah.
one truth that we're talking about. Great.
And it's important to keep it simple. You can get lost in all this stuff. It's about manifestation coming back, absorbed back into the unmanifested. Okay.
Well,
Over
thanks
and
for
over.
saying that, Rick, because when you get into all of those descriptions, and it's like, holy moly, there's
Yeah.
way too much information happening here
Yeah.
and
And you miss the
all,
message. And you miss
yeah,
the message.
all I want to do is live in peace.
Yeah. 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 And you
Right.
can miss the message.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much. I mean, it's great stuff, but yeah, it's too
Yeah.
much.
So 333, problems and peace.
Okay, this ain't an easy one. They're ultimately one, obviously. Some say they have no problems. Okay, he says they're cowards and basically in denial of the facts. Uh, Problems and issues coexist, or can coexist within the greater sense of peace. Uh, Happiness and unhappiness are only seen as opposites, 180 degrees from each other, when they are seen as very limited in scope. In other words, they're seen as states of mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
And
peace
separate.
has no opposite. Okay. If it's seen as a state of mind, then yes, there's a peace, there's a happy and unhappy, as their heads and the tails. Uh, they're both limited expressions.
Mm.
And if either of these expressions continue, essentially it vanishes into, just peace itself, understanding.
Yeah. Well,
Typically, we use it.
this is where duality and non-duality, they don't really coexist. They don't exist at all.
Duality doesn't exist. Right.
Non-duality and duality, they don't exist.
Right. I say, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Typically, we use these words to describe states, to label an experience. Okay. But the piece he's talking about is beyond the experience. Okay. That's the takeaway. In the similar way, a thought can't be happy, yeah, it's just a thought. It's just a story, a construct, or limited expression.
Yeah.
Unhappiness is a product of thought, period.
Yeah.
Where's unhappiness or sadness when you fall asleep, right? When you wake up, it requires a thought to reinstate unhappiness, okay? Or
Well,
the limited peace.
it's likely that when you're sleeping that you're experiencing happiness, unless of course you're dreaming and being chased by somebody who wants to kill you. Jenny said they are a human concept, useful for communication. Yes. Yeah. There are distinctions that are very helpful, because the communication, the understanding in a relative way, brings it enables, or it establishes peace and happiness.
So we normally typically associate peace, the real peace, grace, with good experience. Okay, something that's pleasant. I mean, we're just wired that way, but that's really a mistake.
It is.
It's a huge mistake, and that's important,
Mhm.
because grace can often come through in the midst of the greatest challenges. Okay, when you're told you're about to die, you lose a loved one, you're getting a divorce, whatever the case may be, and we're typically very often conditioned to run away from those events as fast as we possibly can. And there's something to be said, which the Buddha clearly made it clear. It's an opportunity to just stop. Don't try to solve it, just be with it. Because sometimes real answers don't come in the form of thinking. Okay. They do, but they come from a different place. Okay.
Mm.
Relax into your problem, relax into the confusion, relax into the not knowing. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves to do that, because when there's problems, there's reactivity far too often. I think that's an important important point. It's a real form of faith. You're putting your faith in the absolute. You're putting your faith in the awareness, in the non-objective, in the gaps. It's an illogical faith, but that's real faith. It's not
That's
based
really-
upon belief.
And it has truer results, or it has truer.
Yes,
It
It's
has a
authentic,
truer
yeah.
direct experience.
exactly. I mean, how many times? I mean, nothing's as bad or as good as first imagined, right? How many times in life things look really bad and all of a sudden it turned out well? You just don't know, you know.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So
Are we done with that one?
334. Oh,
334.
wait, before we move to the next one, Jenny just said, we can use intelligence to resolve practical problems, but without being attached to the outcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's real intelligence. Okay. Because intelligence is just an attribute of consciousness, right? Using intelligence,
Mm.
not being intelligent. It's acting intelligent, using your thinking. Yeah.
But it's not thinking through things for the wisdom. It's allowing the wisdom to fall in to this open space.
And one way I prefer to look at it is thinking, but in an impersonal way. Okay. As soon as it becomes overly personal, now there's an agenda. Now there's a me attached to it. There's an outcome. But if it's impersonal thinking, that's just using your intelligence and problem solving or what have you. You know, too many people are called, I think they call it spiritual bypassing. You know, everything's fine, everything's good, nothing to do. That's a misunderstanding. Okay. You know, that's use your intelligence. You know?
Yeah, but that sounds like you're doing it, and you using your intelligence sounds like there's some kind of you're smart, and because of that, in my mind, there's a higher wisdom that it just comes in. And of course, the mind or the person says, ha, 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 I'm super smart. I did that.
You're absolutely right, Bill. A lot of these writings and a lot of our comments, you got to remember, are from the perspective of, like, from the awakened perspective.
Yeah.
A description from the awakened view.
Yeah.
And all we have is words, but it can be misinterpreted exactly the way you said. So intelligence just happens, just like Jenny said.
Yeah, that's exactly what Jenny just said.
So a lot of our descriptions are from the awakened perspective, and we kind of have to remember that. You know, words are words.
What is the relation between deep sleep and the interval between two mental activities?
Okay, well, that could be between two of anything, two perceptions. What he's talking about again here is the gap, no objectivity. The simple answer is they're identical. They're one and the same. I mean, that's non-duality. That's Advaita, not two. They're exactly the same. It's impossible to establish a relationship. between them because they're identical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He says, if this, they appear different because deep sleep comes in the
Yeah.
disguise of a state during which emphasis is placed on its limitation and its content is ignored.
Right. The
If
concept of deep, yeah,
Go
the
ahead.
concept of deep sleep is a mental view. It's from the waking state perspective. It's a mental perspective.
Mhm.
And we look at it as if it's a state, right? The deep sleep state.
The questioner does, the perception does.
Right. But he's saying that's just a mental disguise. That's just a mental perspective.
Yeah.
Is all it really is.
If this disguise or prejudice, which is purely a product of the waking state, just what you said, is realized as such and thus given up to the waking state itself, what remains over is identical with the interval between thoughts. It is your own real nature.
Yeah.
It's a total paradox.
Yeah, it is. It can definitely.
Yeah, it's always you.
Yeah.
It's never not you.
A lot of these, this section of discourses, he talks, keeps coming back to the gap, what we call the gap, the non-objectivity,
Mhm.
or awareness, whatever word you wanted to use. And Jesus had a parable for that too. He said the birds have their nest, the fox have their den, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head. Again, nothing objective to hold on to.
Isn't that
Okay.
interesting? That's such a good
Same pointer.
interpretation of what he was saying.
Yeah, it's the
That's
exact same
beautiful.
pointer.
Yeah. Too bad Christians, and I was one for a while, didn't get that. Yeah, that
There's
was
a lot of
real-
great messages within
Yeah, there's some
Christianity.
really great messages that completely got misdirected. Too bad.
Yeah.
But we're picking it up now. We only have
Yeah.
a million years or so to go, and then we'll have it.
Another
Maybe.
culprit.
Okay, Jenny said the mind goes through states: sleep, dreaming, waking, consciousness. Consciousness has no states or levels. That's why
Yeah.
awakening is a misnomer. It comes from a dualistic perspective. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. The deep
That's
sleep
right.
is ignored because we assume that nothing's going on there. Okay. So it just gets ignored. But yeah,
Yeah.
there are no states.
I mean, we're gonna talk about this in a minute. I love the last discourse, who dies. This is that's really like that puts
straight to the chase. Straight
yeah,
to the chase.
yeah, really good. So we need to make it to 340. So let's
Okay,
move
when you
on.
get them over there.
Yeah.
Right. 335.
Yeah.
Oh, this is easy. What is the goodness? I mean, what is the truth about doing good to others? This is easy. There's no good and there's no others. Right? I mean, to make a long story short, that's it.
Yeah.
He gives the example that the test of any kind of act is whether or not that act releases you or binds you to a false sense of identity. An example he uses is charity. If I give $100,000 to charity and they're going to put my name up on the building, okay, I feel real great about that. I get my name in the paper, and it's a golden act, but nonetheless, it's a chain. It's a golden chain. Okay.
Yeah.
Because of the agenda, it's focused on me. It's not for good sake. Okay.
Yeah. Is there anyone there to take credit or with an expectation?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he says such an act, from the perspective of truth, he called it an evil act. again, because it's laced with ignorance. At that point, we have left the garden. Okay. We are now identified with being a somebody. Okay. You could look at it that way. It's a very subtle form of ignorance, but it's missing the mark. It's always the mental attitude that counts. Again, about doing good for goodness sake. Good and bad are just descriptions. They're just labels, mental constructs, interpretations. They're judgments. And he says there really is no good, or rather, there's only one good, and that's realizing the truth. That's self-realization. And at that point, good and bad doesn't make any sense. Okay, they dissolve. Okay, because they're opposites. Okay, peace of understanding has no opposite. Okay, good and bad are polarities. They're opposites. Okay. I got a good, real quick story. The Zen farmer. Have you heard it?
No.
Okay, this is a Zen farmer. He lives out in the country with his son, has a horse, makes a small little living on his farm. And one day the horse runs away. Okay. And all the neighbors and friends come over and go, oh, very bad, such bad news. The whole good bad thing again. And he goes, well, we'll see. Okay, I don't know. And the next day, the horse comes back. Okay, and they're all saying, oh, that's so great. That's good. And the farmer says, I don't know. We'll see. Okay. When the horse came back, he brought another horse. Okay. And his son had to train the horse because the horse that came back was kind of wild. Okay. And in the process, the son breaks his leg. Okay. And all the neighbors are going, oh, that's so bad. Not good. Farmer says, I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Next day, the military comes in, find young people to fight a war, and he can't go because he's got a broken leg. Okay. And the neighbors and friends say, oh, that's so great. You see where this is going.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. It doesn't matter. We can't know.
Right.
Yeah. And I've always loved that story because
the farmer was living in the flow. He's living in peace, and things weren't events were not attached to his well-being.
Right. And you can have a story. Stories are fine. We're professional storytellers. We tell others stories. We tell ourselves stories before we even get out of bed. Perfectly fine. It's the human condition. But we don't have to believe it all. It's entertainment. We can't stop doing it. But believing it, that's a different story. I'm sure the farmer told himself some stories along the way, but he didn't necessarily have to believe it.
Well, even the point that you just make that we don't have to believe it, or we stop believing it. What happens is, as awakening or awakeness reveals our true nature, we don't stop doing anything. We stop being attached to the old identity. And because we stop being attached to the old identity, the suffering stops, the attachment, all the things that seem to take our peace away, they're no longer there. The triggers are gone.
The very things that we try to accomplish or solve gets accomplished or solved all by themselves. We just kind of get out of the way, and it happens. And it may not even be noticed until hindsight. Okay, it happens by itself. It's not like a checklist. You're making these things happen to live a better life and so forth. No, that's a misunderstanding. So it really gets back to identity, what you really identify with. Okay, that's.
And who are you?
Line. Same question. Same thing.
Who are you?
Same question.
William posted something from Krishnamurti saying, he says, I don't care what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Byron Katie kind of followed that with her statement. It's not that I don't care. I don't mind. I don't mind what happens.
It doesn't mean there's not going to be a reaction to it. It's like caring without caring. Okay. There's
Yeah.
just, again, no me. There'll be a
Yeah.
reaction. Of course, you have preferences. It's not like, oh, I don't have any preferences. That's a misunderstanding. Everyone
Right.
has preferences. Okay. But you're not hypnotized by it. Okay. So to speak.
Whatever happens, I don't mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe still have preferences. I like that car better than that one, but I'll drive both, either one. Yeah. 336, how to educate children.
How to educate children. Well, this is interesting. It's relatively short, and this can kind of be sensitive for some people. I mean, who doesn't want the best for their kids, right?
Yeah.
But he attempts to make the distinction here between false learning, vidya, and true learning, vidya. False learning is always about, you could say, always about education. It's always about growing up. It's about the phenomenal objective world, right?
Yeah. Getting
And
ahead,
learning
having a
about it.
good job, being
Yeah.
educated.
It's about being a
Yeah.
somebody. It's about
Yeah.
being a somebody, really.
Right.
Whereas the true learning is about the truth. It's about the I principle. Not to be confused with the I thought, but the I principle. It's about the
Mhm.
gap. It's about awareness. It's about consciousness. It's about the noumenal.
Yeah.
And he goes on further and he says it's the vidya, the true learning, the only thing that matters, because that's the real understanding, which allows the false learning to happen. Okay. You know, which
Yeah.
is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Mhm.
So the false learning, again, like we said, it's about growing up. Okay. And the true learning is about waking up.
Well, and the
you know.
false learning is necessary and helpful for survival. And then
Yeah.
Somehow the interest in identification or who you are, that comes in later when you are more mature as an ego person. So I don't know how this happens. Why some people have an interest in knowing the self or self-realization, or some people have an interest and other people don't.
Right. It's kind of paradoxical because you kind of go through the system and society. You have to learn to be a somebody before you can be kind of a nobody. So it's a paradoxical look almost. No one can argue the need for education, English, skills, coping, self-esteem, respect. All those things are absolutely critical to be a functioning member of society, right? But he goes on to warn, that's what's done at school. But the true learning, is done at home. And this was his year. I would say today it could be done on Zoom, like we're doing right now, or having the right friends, so to speak. In other words, it's less by words, it's more by example. What's commonly referred to as transmission. There's a big. I mean, Atmananda even warned about this. He said, "Words are the teaching of untruth." His words. Words are the teaching of untruth, and you needed a living teacher. Our teachers today, at least in this country, our teachers have a hard time effectively teaching English and mathematics. How in the world are they going to teach something like non-duality when they're not even established in it themselves? It's a train wreck. It's a disaster. It can't happen.
It's a culture difference too, because when you go to India, there's a lot, not in all of the villages and everything, but I mean they definitely have their spiritual or their mystical or their religious things that they pass on to their children, just like everyone else. But there seems to be a higher level of entrainment in spiritual and religious matters in the East than there is here. And I think even here, I think parents are starting to, at least my hope is that parents are starting to pass on a higher value system. And I think that's why the churches are being left and spiritual matters are becoming more of more interest, because the church has a way. If you're in church and you have gay children, you have a problem. You have a train wreck happening. You
Yeah.
have to either you have to like have bad children or you have a bad church. You have to decide.
And that's the nature of religion. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd argue to say that all of them started from a very authentic message, okay? But they get lost in thought. They get lost in belief, okay?
Yeah.
Lost in the experiential, okay? And they turn into something ridiculous.
So
I wrote down a few pointers.
Let's pick up something that Jenny said. She said not necessarily, and we were talking about the learning, mathematics, language, economics, philosophy are helpful to enable us to play our role as a body mind in the world. None of those require belief to be somebody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And what were the bullets you want to make before we move?
Just a couple of bullets about the home part, pointers about learning at home. And again, they're just speak for themselves. They can teach your children to learn to appreciate silence. Okay. It's not about constant, stimulation. It's not about constant doing in their life. It's time to go to bed. It's time to brush your teeth. It's time to do your homework. It's time to cut the grass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That stuff needs to happen, but it doesn't need to happen at the sacrifice of the non-doing stuff, the pure attention for attention's sake, so to speak. Being together with no agenda. That's how we see. That's experiential. That's how you're teaching without even knowing it. What we're talking about here, in my view, it's about being connected. Importance of inquiry and asking questions. Okay, I think it's something that can be reinforced. Don't try to save your kids all the time. Sometimes dysfunction is the doorway to grace, as we talked about. Try to realize their actual beingness. That's pay attention to the importance of humor. Can they laugh at themselves, especially? I think that's an important one. And have healthy role models. And that's usually not the parent. It starts out that way, but they reach the age where the parent doesn't know anything. Okay. And sometimes later on in life, they kind of go full circle. No, maybe my parents did know something, But finding good role models, I think that can help. Values, of course. It's okay not to always fit in. I think that's an important thing. But in the end, it's all grace. Everyone does the best they can. I mean, even sages, their kids weren't necessarily sages. Okay. So it's not like a recipe you can make your kids awake. And that's a fool's errand. Okay. You just practice what we're calling awakeness and let the universe take care of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I do have an interest in parents that are living the awakening experience, because there is a different, I'm a different guy than I was on the spiritual path or on the non-dual path than I was on the Christian path. I raised my kids different than I would today. So I think this understanding really will have a lasting effect on humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what goes a long ways, Bill, lastly, especially for older children. And again, it's experiential. It's nothing that you say, but they see that you're interested in this. Okay. It's from they see your interest. They see your actions. It's not even what you're saying. Okay. But they pick up on that. And that's experiential. That's important. It's not you lecturing to them about it, but they see that interest in you, that enthusiasm about the truth. And that's contagious. Okay. That's worth 1 billion words. Okay. That transmission, that example. right?
Yeah.
When you think about it, yeah.
So let's look at memory 337. I didn't have anything on this except a question mark.
I don't remember. Well,
Memory
anyways, this one's very
Yeah.
short.
Yeah, memory is double-edged. It is a thought like any other thought, and it is a cheat outright because it makes you believe that something that never happened happened.
Yeah, it's a trickster. It's a magician. Okay, it makes you think something exactly as it. Bottom up, memory is a thought. That's important. You can call it a memory thought, but it's still a thought. And like any other thought or sensation, it's an arising. It comes and goes. It subsides. These memory thoughts are, Buddha had a great example. He identified this thousands of years ago, the nature of thought and memory. And it was words to the effect, he goes, I'm on to you. He called it the house builder. He goes, talking about thought and memory. He goes, I know what you're doing, and I know exactly how you're doing it. Okay. Again, the nature of thought. Okay. Thoughts happen now. A memory is not now. Okay. The two never meet. Okay. The two never meet. But the only thought says otherwise. Okay. But the Buddha sees the nature of this happening, this mechanism, and you call it the house builder, how imagination and thought gets in there and creates this mess, house building. I thought that was pretty good. Because you don't actually experience a memory. Okay. What you experience is a thought now. Okay. That memory, what we're calling a memory, was just a thought. It's gone. Right. The previous, there is the present thought, the now. Okay?
Yeah.
But we want to put time into it.
Yeah, that's it right there. We're not really experiencing memory. We're just we're always experiencing a thought right now.
Right. There's no
that brings
verification.
everything into the present moment.
Memory doesn't do what it's advertised to do. There's no verification. They have no reference, put it that way.
Yeah.
The original thought, the memory, and the later thought. The two never touch. Okay.
Conte said, Angelo DeLullo said, ego is just created by memory. The ego. I would say that the ego, or that memory, is just an ego identity, or is just the ego grasping for reference.
I wouldn't even go that far. I'd say memory is just a thought. There can be many different memories. It's just a thought, but it's a previous thought. It's not the current thought. Okay, we're throwing time into this, which doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Let's
move to 338. Unless you have some other points on memory.
No.
Memory. Wait a minute. Memory is the ego taking a bow.
Yeah, I like that.
Ever happened.
Right.
That's good. Thank you, Eve. William said, memory is a self-edited story about a non-existing character. Yeah. Sounds like memory's not very helpful.
Experientially, we kind of want to tie it together. But when a memory, which is a thought, arises, the original memory is gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's nowhere to be found.
We're just really categorizing the misinterpretation of thought that's being interpreted as memory.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the misallocation of thought that's being interpreted as something from the past, and it's really something that's now.
Yes. Yep. We just took a bunch of words and narrowed it down to the essence right there.
Right. Yeah. Where did this misunderstanding start? And I'm not sure that this question is talking about the last discourse.
Now, who knows what he's talking about? I mean, the questioner, but I think he's talking about misunderstanding generally. It could be any misunderstanding, really. He's talking about not understanding. Okay, he's talking about maybe ignorance or illusion. Misunderstanding is not understanding. I think we could agree on that, right?
All right. Yeah.
But and he goes on to say that the principle behind this question is causality. You know, what caused the misunderstanding? Okay, but this is just a product of thought again. The fundamental misunderstanding and the misunderstanding of all misunderstandings is back to the mother of misunderstandings is the I thought, or in this case, he's saying I am the body. Okay, and that's just a thought, right? It's a product of the I thought. I am the body. Okay, it's a thought.
It's a product of the I becoming identified as the body.
Yes, but it's still a thought. An infant doesn't realize it has a body. It doesn't say my body, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So then he says it's just a thought form. It's just a belief, and like all thoughts, can only exist on the level of thought. They only exist on the mental plane. Thoughts exist on the mental plane. That makes sense. So how in the world can they tell us anything about the body, which is on the physical plane? Again, the two never touch. The thought is on a mental plane, has nothing to do with the body. It's a projection about the body. So the two never actually touch. They don't exist. Cause and effect don't exist. They're in two separate planes. That's what he's saying. The cause and effect, and that is an illusion. Thought is required to have any diversity. Beyond thought, there's no division, no diversity. Differences cannot exist without thought. Full stop, period. And again, a newborn, I mean, a really young newborn, there's no thought, there's just experience. There's no distinctions between mommy, daddy, and whatever. It's just thought hasn't arisen yet. Then he goes on and says, the searching for this cause and misunderstanding, looking for a cause, which is a thought, right? On the mental plane, is trying to find something in a different plane. Again, like we said, it's impossible. We're trying to find diversity or division, which is a thought, in the plane where it doesn't exist in the body. What do you say? It sounds confusing, but it really ain't. Your mental plane, the thought, and your physical. The two never touch. Okay, is what he's trying to.
If you continue to inquire into the cause of avidya, false knowledge, you would still be entangled within the boundaries of avidya itself.
Yeah, what he's saying is, if you continue to inquire into the cause, which is thought, right?
Yeah.
You're using thought, inquiring is, it's nothing more than false knowledge again.
Right.
You're
So
going
you're
to
just
continue to
staying
be lost
entangled.
in thought. It's a virtual your washing machine. You're stuck in the washing machine and lost in thought. Okay.
Right.
And it's got nothing to do with the body. So again, cause and effect are ultimately illusions. They never intersect. Any cause and effect implies a duality. And we know there is no duality. Experientially.
Initially, when we're hearing of these, the teachings, cause and effect can be helpful in recognizing that in time, cause and effect seems to have a relationship. And then when you go deeper or more expanding, you realize that they are the illusion.
And I think that's important. Cause and effect, we use it all the time in daily life. But what we're talking about here is experientially. Okay, we're talking about the truth, not what's used. And again, back to like intelligence can cause and effect, but we're talking the truth experientially, what's really occurring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the
Exactly.
thing. Duality is a prerequisite for cause and effect. Okay, that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Before we move on, let's look at Jenny said something about memory that I think is pretty cool. Memory is essential for practical purposes. Time has no existence, therefore, at absolute level, there can be no memory. But memory, Jenny is saying that memory is essential for practical purposes, remembering. So just bringing, instead of leaving memory as a almost like a roadkill.
Right.
I think that's what Jenny is offering, is that, it's really helpful. Memory is really helpful if we keep it in context of what it's for.
Right. It can be used while simultaneously understanding that experientially it's not real. That doesn't mean it's not useful. Of course it's useful. We'd be lost without memory. It's part of the conditioning process. It's part of learning. How can
Right.
you learn anything without memory?
Right.
Okay. But you can see through it experientially the mechanism of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Thank
mean
you.
it's not important.
Yeah.
Okay. It is extremely important. And that very often gets lost, that distinction. Memory is critical, but at the same time, we can see the truth of what is really going on. Okay. When we talk about memory.
Yeah. So let's go back to what we were talking about, because there's some comments on that. Jenny said that mind works only in time, therefore cause and effect is an essential model for the working of the mind. Doesn't mean that it's truth. Truth is beyond mind. Yeah. So it is,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
I think this conversation is important because it
Yes.
gives distinctions, and also those distinctions really are, as to your point, they're distinguishing between relative and
Yes.
truth
Yes.
and
Right.
experience.
And that's a distinction that often gets lost. Okay. Um, you know, Thinking is critical, memory is critical, time and space is critical. Thinking, but we can see what's really going on there. Okay. Rather than just saying that's not real. Good luck with that.
So we need to move. We have two more things, and we haven't talked about who dies.
Oh boy.
We have two more discourses. So 339 is, what is the cause of illusion or unreality?
Okay. For starters, I can, you got the word illusion. Very often it's confused with ignorance, and they're different. As I said earlier, I see illusion as a product of the senses, particularly thought. Our senses are about noticing objects, and it's not about really what's there. They're designed for survival. Let me put it that way. Okay. Where ignorance is false identity, right? But the cause of illusion or unreality, I don't like that unreality either, because there's just reality. But you're saying there can't be a cause for unreality, and I agree, it's impossible. Therefore, it must be its own cause. Illusion is the result of illusion. As you can see, the circular argument here, it goes nowhere. It makes no sense. It's meaningless. So in the end, there's no cause for illusion. Okay, period. Everything that can be perceived through the senses has some objective quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
He says everything that can be known is knowledge itself. Okay, that's kind of hard to argue. All that is known is the knowable. This includes ignorance itself. Even ignorance, once known, becomes knowledge, right? Because it's knowable. It's now known.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that would
Once
be
it's-
equivalent to everything just is.
Right. It's just another arising, no different than
Right.
any
Yeah.
other arising.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't touch it. Let it pass by, whatever.
And if it's not known, who cares? It's not a problem. Right.
It's not who cares. I don't give a shit. It's whatever
It
happens.
doesn't
I don't
matter.
mind.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, when we're stuck in ignorance, when you're actually behavior, whatever, that's ignorance. You don't know. You're not even aware of it. But the coming out, the recognition of what you're doing and recognizing that, you know, that behavior is being ignorance. You know, I was lost with the races. That's no longer ignorance. Okay. And people very often at that point start feeling guilty or wanting to get down on themselves or I need to do better. No. That recognition is important. That should be celebrated. Okay. Not getting down on yourself. As soon as you recognize ignorance, you're no longer in ignorance. It's now known, it's knowable, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. We only have 4 minutes. Let's look at who
Oh.
dies. This is good. Who
Oh
dies?
boy. You know, this is a very it's a great teaching. It's a very fundamental question, who dies. In fact, most religions and traditions somehow
This is
usually
so
talk
good.
about it. So
Yeah.
usually by avoiding it, okay? Or refusing. The question itself is very similar to who dies, okay? Or who am
It
I?
is a question.
It's the same pointer. It's the same realization. Or to die before you die. It's all the same pointing, really. He's pointing to what we call here is no form, the changeless, okay?
Yeah. The body and the life principle are the only two fundamental entities involved in the change called death. Of these two, the body has always been dead and inert matter, and as such cannot die again. I like that statement.
Yeah, he takes it very scientifically, okay? A very scientific approach. There's only two elements: the body, which is a cadaver, it's a chunk of meat, it's made of chemicals, what have you. It can't die, right? And the other element is the soul, or the what do you call it? The life principle, the spirit.
Yeah, the I principle. The life
the
principle is always changeless, and so it can also never die.
Because it was never born. Okay.
Right.
It's not objective. We're back to the objectivity again. It was never born. So these two things, you know, the spirit, he goes on to say the spirit, what we're calling the spirit or life principle, doesn't make up the body. Anyone that's ever seen a dead body is well aware of that. Okay. It's just like we said, a chunk of meat. But then he says, you know, you believe you'll die, but how do you know that? He says, how do you know that? Who experiences it? Who knows it? Okay.
This is really helpful for people that are afraid of death.
Yep. And I would say 99.9% of all fears imaginable, if you pull the thread, get back to the fear of death or the fear of not being, okay? Whether it's realized or not, they really do. If you peel the onion. But what he's saying here,
there can be a witness only when something known is concerned, but you never know death. Between two mentations, there is nothing known, and so the witnesshood also cannot be present.
Right. Remember, the witness and what's witnessed are not separate. They always arise together. The known and the knowing of it, or the witness of it. You can't have one without the other. Okay, and that's important. They always arise together. Okay, we talk about them as if they're separate, but they're not. They're one. So in a nutshell, death really has no meaning. It's a label we put on things that we don't understand. Okay.
Well, it's because it's the ego that doesn't understand it, because it's not because it's the false image that we made of ourselves.
Right. I mean, most you can say about death is it's the ultimate. It's another gap, right? There's nothing objective there. The senses fall away. The sense of me falls away. The story falls away, but the I is still there. Again, it's the ultimate gap, you could call it. Okay.
Yep.
There's nothing there to experience. So how can you say I died? Okay.
There's nobody. There's no one there to prove this. There's no one there to make that statement. Yeah.
But that's why every tradition talks about this in varying degrees, because we hear that, and very often in spiritual circles we talk about letting go. Okay, and words like that. We're very comfortable saying that, but which is nothing more than a subtle way of saying death, letting go, right? But as soon as you put the word death in there, panic.
Exactly.
Fear comes in.
Yeah. So we're going to close now, because people have to go, and I do too. Amy Habel said, "Here, all fear is ultimately reducible to the basic misinterpretation that you have the ability to usurp the power of all that is." ACIM adapted. Sorry for the TOGID. Will change. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your input. Rick West, you were awesome. Come back and join us again.
That was fun.
It was
Yeah,
fun.
that was fun.
And thank you all for being with us. Thank you for joining. Next week is William Price. He's already left, and we'll share that with him. We'll share the discourses with him. And